Carmen from Minerva, and today we are going to be sewing up a pair of comfy linen pants together with the Opal Pants pattern from Megan Nielsen Patterns. I am going to be sewing view A, which is this paper bag waist pant with a waist belt. And we will be using this beautiful linen fabric, which will be tagged down below if you want to check it out. In fact, everything I used to make these pants today will be tagged down below if you want to make a pair of pants just like the pair that I'm making today. Also, if you've already created your free account here with Minerva, you can actually save the products and posts that you love so that you can come back to them later. So, for example, you could save this fabric or the pattern, or even this video tutorial if you want to come back to them later. Alright, so let's get into sewing these perfect linen summer pants. So this pattern comes in sizes 0 through 20, and you're going to need 2 measurements to find the size that you want to cut. So you're going to need your waist measurement as well as your hip measurement. So to measure your waist, you're going to want to measure with your tape measure around the smallest part of your waist. And to measure your hip, you're going to want to measure with your tape measure around the largest part of your hip, which is usually around the fullest part of your bum. Then you're going to want to choose the size that corresponds with your measurements when comparing it to the sizing chart on the back of the pattern. And if your waist and hip measurements fall into different sizes, that is okay. You can just cut the size that corresponds to your larger measurement. For loose-fitting, elasticated waist pants like this, there's usually no need to worry about grading in between sizes or anything like that. If you cut the larger of the 2 sizes, you should be just fine for a pattern like this. So to make view A along with me, you're going to need to cut out 2 front pieces, 2 back pieces, 2 paper bag waistband pieces, 4 inseam pocket pieces, 1 belt loop piece, and 2 belt pieces. So the first thing we need to do for these pants is to put together the pockets. So first you'll want to finish the pockets along the curved edge, and you could do this with a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, but I decided to use my serger just because it was faster and I like the look better. So I finished the curved edges on all 4 pocket pieces, and next we need to attach the pocket pieces to both the front and the back pant leg pieces. So I started with the front pant leg pieces, and I laid one of my pocket pieces right sides together on each of the pant legs along that upper side seam edge, and I just made sure that the notches on the side seam matched up with the notches on the pocket pieces. And I pinned 1 pocket piece to each pant leg and then sewed them in place with a 5/8 inch seam allowance on my sewing machine. And with the pocket pieces sewn on, we can now finish the entire side seam on both front pieces with either a zigzag stitch or a serger. Then we can grab our iron and press the pocket pieces away from the pant leg pieces, making sure to press the seam allowances towards the pocket pieces. Next, you're going to want to understitch the pocket by stitching just inside the pocket through the pocket piece and the seam allowances, and this is just going to help keep the pocket piece from rolling towards the outside so it stays nice and hidden in the side seam when you're wearing the pants. Next, just repeat that entire process to attach the other 2 pocket pieces to the back leg pieces. Next up, we're ready to really start putting these pants together. So grab 1 front piece and 1 back piece and line the side seams up with the right sides together and pin them above the upper notch and below the lower notch. So you're going to have about 1.5 inches or so along the top of the pocket that's going to be pinned, as well as 1.5 inches or so in the bottom part of the pocket. Then you want to take this to your sewing machine and sew it with a 5/8 inch seam allowance above the upper notch and below the lower notch. Just make sure that you leave that opening between the notches, because that is going to be your pocket opening and you definitely do not want to close that up. With the side seams sewn, now we can close up the pockets. So I pinned all the way around the 2 pocket pieces, making sure to line them up around that long curved edge. And then I took it to my sewing machine and sewed it with a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around that long curved edge. And you just want to make sure that along the bottom part of the pocket that you sew until you reach the side seam that you just sewed, but making sure that you don't go beyond the side seam. And with the pocket bag sewn, you now have a pocket. So next I just took it to my iron and I gave it a good pressing so that everything would be laying nice and flat. Next, making sure that the pocket was pressed towards the front leg piece, I lined up the top edge of the pocket with the top edge of the front leg piece and pinned it in place, and I sewed it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're using 1/2 inch this time because we want the stitching to be hidden inside of the waistband seam later on. Next up, just repeat that same process to sew the other front and back leg pieces together. Now it is time to sew the crotch seams. So line up the 2 front crotch seams and the 2 back crotch seams with the right sides together, then pin and sew the crotch seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once they are sewn, you can go ahead and finish both crotch seams however you like, either with a zigzag stitch or a serger, which is what I am doing here. Next, you can press the seam allowances of both crotch seams to one side. It doesn't really matter which side. Personally, I like to press them towards opposite directions so that there will be less bulkiness when we sew up the inseam. And speaking of the inseam, that is the next seam that we need to sew. So I've turned the pants inside out and I'm going to pin the entire inseam from one ankle all the way through the crotch and down to the other ankle, just making sure that I'm matching up the crotch seams as I'm pinning. Once I get it pinned, I'm just going to take it to my sewing machine and sew the entire inseam with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And just like with everything else, I'm going to take it to my serger to finish that seam and then press it with my iron to one side. And now we have kind of a weird looking pair of pants with no waistband, and it is now time to move on to the belt loops. So to sew the belt loops, you'll need to grab your one belt loop piece and fold it in half with right sides together, folding it the long ways, matching up the long edges and pinning along that edge. Then you want to sew it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I just used my serger for this because my serger already sews with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I was able to sew it and finish it all in one step. Then it's time to turn the belt loop piece right sides out, and you could use a loop turner for this like I did, or you could use a safety pin. It is totally up to you, but however you want to, just turn the belt loop piece right sides out. And once you get it turned right sides out, we'll need to give it a good pressing with the iron because we want it to be laying nice and flat. And once you get it ironed nice and flat, if you want an extra special look like I did, you can top stitch about 1/8 of an inch in from each side. So here's what we've got so far. The belt loop piece is looking great, and now we need to cut it into 5 equal pieces. So I basically just used the markings on the pattern to figure out how long to make my first piece, and then I just cut the other 4 to be the same length as the first one so that they would all be the same size. And there was a little bit extra fabric left on the end, which I think was just extra fabric in case of error, which is always nice to have. With the belt loops made, it is now time to sew them onto the pants. So you can pin each of the belt loops right sides together along the top edge of the pant waistline, lining up the raw edge of the belt loop with the raw edge of the waistline, and lining up the belt loops with the 4 notches, 2 on the front and 2 on the back, and the 5th belt loop lines up with the center back seam. And once you've got them all pinned on, you can take it to your sewing machine and just sew each of those belt loops on 1 inch below the upper raw edge of the waistline. With the belt loops sewn on, it is now time for the waistband. So first you'll want to mark in the stitching lines from your pattern onto your waistband pieces. And I also marked in the fold line, but you really only need the stitching lines. So to figure out where to draw my lines, I basically notched where the lines were on each end of my piece. And then I could just draw straight lines with my ruler between each of the pairs of notches. So that made it really easy to figure out where my lines were. I also made sure that my markings were on the right side of both pieces because you want to be able to see the markings later on when the right side is showing so you know where to stitch. Then, to make sure that my waistband was going to be nice and crisp once it was sewn up, I added a strip of interfacing to both of the waistband pieces along the center in between the stitching lines. And I also made sure that I did this on the wrong side of the fabric because we definitely don't want the interfacing showing on the right side. With the interfacing on, it is now time to start putting together the waistband. We are getting so close. So to put together the waistband, first I placed the 2 waistband pieces right sides together and I pinned them along the short ends. Then I just took it to my sewing machine and I sewed them together at each of the short ends with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once it was sewn, I just took the waistband to my ironing board and I pressed the seam allowances open. Once I had my seam allowances pressed open, then I turned under 5/8 inch along one side of the waistband all the way around, turning it in towards the wrong side of the waistband. And I ironed it as I went and also pinned it up. Now, if your fabric presses really nicely like mine does, the pins probably aren't necessary. You can just press up 5/8 of an inch. But if your fabric doesn't press quite as nice, you can definitely use pins. Next, we can go ahead and attach this waistband to the pants. So grab out your pants and your waistband, and you can pin the waistband to the pants waistline with the right sides together, matching up the raw edge along the top of the pants with the non-folded edge of the waistband. And also make sure to line up the seams of the waistband with the side seams of the pants, and lining up one of the notches of the waistband with the center front seam of the pants and one of the notches with the center back seam of the pants. And once you've got it pinned, you can go ahead and take it to your sewing machine and sew the waistband to the pants with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So once you've got the waistband sewn onto the pants, you're going to want to take it to your ironing board and press the waistband and the seam allowances from the seam that you just sewed up towards the waistband. We want to make sure that the seam allowances are pressed up because they're going to be hidden in the next step. Then you can turn the pants inside out and fold the waistband down towards the inside of the pants, making sure that the folded edge of the waistband is covering up all of those seam allowances. So basically lining up the folded edge with the seam that you just sewed. Then you can take it to your sewing machine and you can top stitch the waistband down by sewing just above the waist seam that attaches the waistband to the pants. And while you're doing this top stitching, just make sure that you leave about a 2 to 3 inch opening unsewn so that you can go in and insert your elastic later. And once you have the bottom row of stitching sewn on your waistband, then you can go back in and stitch all the way around the waistband along the stitching line, which is in the center of the waistband. And this is going to be the top of the elastic casing, so you're not going to need to leave an opening in the upper line of stitching like you did with the previous line of stitching. And here's what we've got. We've got a beautiful waistband, and all that we need now is elastic. So you're going to want to cut your piece of elastic according to your measurements on the size chart, and then thread the elastic through the waistband with the safety pin, using the opening that you left in the lower line of stitching. Just be careful not to let the end of the elastic disappear into the waistband so that once you get it all the way around, you have both ends coming out of the opening in the waistband. And once you have the elastic all the way through the waistband, you can go ahead and overlap the ends of the elastic by about 1/2 inch and take it to your sewing machine and sew it together with a zigzag stitch. Next up, take the pants back to the sewing machine and finish that lower line of top stitching to close up that opening in the waistband. Now we need to finish off the belt loops on the pants. So to do that, you'll want to fold down the top edge of each of the belt loops by about 1/4 inch and then line up the folded edge with that top row of stitching and then pin it and sew it in place with a straight stitch. I went back and forth over the top of the belt loops a couple times to make sure that it was extra secure. Now the pants are almost done and now we just need to hem them. So to hem the pants, I turned the pants inside out and then folded up each hem by 1/2 inch and pressed it. Then I folded it up again by another 1 inch and pressed it again, pinned everything in place, and then top stitched it on my machine just under 1 inch so that I would catch that folded edge. So the very last thing that we need to do to finish up these pants is to sew the belt. So you can grab out your 2 belt pieces and then place them with right sides together and pin and sew them together along the short ends to make one long piece. Once your belt pieces are sewn together and the seam allowance has been pressed open, then you can place the belt piece right side up on the table and fold it in half lengthwise with right sides together and pin and sew the edges together along the long edge as well as the 2 angled edges. Just make sure that when you sew the belt that you leave about a 3-inch opening somewhere around the center of the long edge so that you can turn the belt right sides out when you're done. Once the belt has been sewn, it will help a lot to trim down the seam allowances around the corners on the 2 angled edges before you attempt to turn it right sides out. And then you can turn the strap right sides out through the opening that you left, and this will probably take quite a while to work it right sides out, but it will work eventually. Once the belt is turned right sides out, we can take it to the ironing board and press the entire belt nice and flat with my iron. Once I have it pressed flat, then I took it to my sewing machine and I top stitched all the way around all the edges of the belt about 1/16 of an inch in from all the edges. But if you don't like the look of the top stitching, you could just press the belt flat and then close up the opening with a hand sewing stitch. And once the belt is done, the pants are completely finished. And that's all there is to it. Here are the finished pants. I hope you're feeling ready to jump into sewing some comfy linen pants And like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, everything I use to make these pants will be tagged down below to make it really easy for you to find. And of course, if you have any questions about this project, feel free to leave a comment and we will get back to you to answer your questions. Also, don't forget to hit that follow button above this video to follow Minerva to see more videos like this one. So thanks for watching and happy sewing!